biggest question that I have about a new PlayStation handheld is this a mistake? And I'm not talking about the PS Portal, I'm talking about the rumors that Sony is working on another handheld, and it has been corroborated by multiple sources, so everybody's weighing in on what this thing might look like. Digital Foundry thinks that it would not be able to play PS5 games natively, given the raw power required to run those games not really being capable on a handheld over the next few years. And according to my own research and my own sources, this would be a few years away at a minimum. But the report did indicate that this would be for handheld PS5 games, and I don't even know what that would be then. Another question would be, how are you going to pull that off? I mean, is it even technologically possible if that is Sony and PlayStation's goal here? But the most interesting part about these rumors is not that Sony wants to try to do this again with the handheld, it's that they want to rival Nintendo. The Nintendo Switch and the impending Switch 2 are leviathans in the market already. Currently, the estimates for the Nintendo Switch is that it sold close to 150 million units, and it's obvious that nobody's even really trying to compete with the Switch as a handheld console. The Asus, the Steam Deck, these don't really position themselves as competitors with the Switch because their price point is so significantly higher. They're targeting a very different market. But Xbox is heavily hinting that they're going to have a handheld in the future, and now we have enough sources to say that PlayStation's making one as well. I have a lot of questions, but before I get to those questions, if you like this kind of content, my uploads typically redirect to a live stream that follows the video, and then we discuss the topic as well as other gaming news subjects. So if you like this kind of content, hit like and subscribe. So the first question we have to answer is, what do we know? Well, first, the report came from Bloomberg, and the headline simply states that Sony working on handheld console for PS5 games to rival Switch. And according to the article, Sony Group Corp is in the early stages of developing a portable console that would play its PlayStation 5 games on the move. This obviously makes the Digital Foundry prediction even more interesting, but more on that in a minute. According to this, people close to it have said that it is both aimed at competing with Nintendo, but also that it would be a few years away. The product is aimed at expanding Sony's reach and contending with Nintendo Company for the portable gaming market, according to people familiar with its development. It would also counter any potential mobile hardware from Xbox maker Microsoft, which is working on prototypes in the category as well. Sony's portable device is likely years away from launch, and the company could still decide against bringing it to market, the people said, asking not to be named, discussing private plans. Now, since this Bloomberg report landed, other sources and insiders have claimed that they have heard similar things. Digital Foundry is actually one of the sources that corroborated this. So that's basically all we know, which is why I have so many questions, okay? First, what led to this, okay? Are there any tech breakthroughs that are going to help this thing actually run PS5 games? We know PSSR is something they designed specifically for the Pro and future consoles. Is that a part of this? Could they just abandon this because it ends up not being strong enough? And why target Nintendo? How did the PSP as well as the Vita stack up sales-wise? So first, let's just look at what led to this. When the PS Portal was first rumored, the claims came from Insider Gaming. In April of 2023, Insider Gaming had an article titled "Exclusive: Sony's Next PlayStation Handheld." And this was the one that got Tom Henderson a lot of flack because everybody thought it was totally outside the realm of possibility that PlayStation would do another handheld. So big ups to Tom for getting this one right. And in the article, this is what was claimed. Codenamed the Q Lite, the next PlayStation handheld is the next piece of Sony hardware that aims to be yet another piece of hardware that requires the PlayStation 5. Insider Gaming understands that the Q Lite is not a cloud streaming device, but instead uses remote play with the PlayStation 5, a feature the console giant has been pushing these past couple of weeks. Now, you'll notice they were internally referring to this as the Q Lite. At the time, nobody really focused much on this, but I actually think it's pretty telling. It very likely means that the PS Portal is just phase 1. It's the Q Lite. It's the weaker, smaller, or first version. Even the Portal has changed as a device just recently. When the Portal was first announced, I kept saying, I really think they're going to add cloud functionality later because remote playing on my own PS5 is not really that far removed from what cloud gaming actually is. You're remoting into another device and playing on that. So I see them releasing the Portal and then adding cloud as the first step toward a genuine handheld. Now, I would argue this because the sales success of the Portal has also likely pushed them to pursue this further. It did far better than they expected. Just adding cloud stoked the demand fires once again. And something that didn't really get a ton of commentary is that the PS Portal is now a device that can be purchased and used by someone, and you don't need a PS5. You can just play it as a cloud device. So this is just more groundwork for a true handheld because it's the first iteration of PlayStation hardware that allows you to engage with actual PlayStation games without the console. In the past, you were playing specific games for that specific device, which leads to the next big question. Is this thing actually going to be able to play PS5 games? Obviously, the issue for a handheld is having enough raw power to give good performance. The main drawback of the Nintendo Switch is not just that it's 7 years old at this point, it's that it has very little raw power given its portability and its size. If you've ever held one, it's actually very thin. At some level, it's truly remarkable that games like Breath of the Wild or Hogwarts Legacy even run on the Switch. But even more expensive and newer handhelds are also not offering performance that I would personally want to engage with if I'm playing a game like Spider-Man 2 or Ghost of Tsushima. Most reports claim that an Asus ROG Ally or a Steam Deck are only really getting 60 FPS if you lower settings and resolution by a pretty good amount. I saw one person saying that they were playing Cyberpunk at 900p resolution and about 50 FPS. That to me is just not worth the price, especially when 99% of the time I'm gaming, I'm in my living room and there's a TV and a console right there. So if a future PlayStation handheld wants to truly run PS5 games native, it's going to need those games to push out versions that have settings that are specifically made for this handheld. A handheld mode that would be lowering the resolution, turning off features like ray tracing just to get it to run well. But then I looked at the newly developed launched PSSR technology for the PS5 Pro. And it really makes me wonder, maybe they had a breakthrough. Maybe PSSR will help create a handheld mode, something that has a very low internal resolution, but is still able to run the games well. Because if you have a base PS5 or a PS5 Pro or a Portal, you're going to get really accustomed to games looking good as well as hitting 60 FPS. Mark Cerny himself said in the PS5 Pro announcement video that 3 out of 4 people are choosing performance modes over quality modes. So my personal opinion is that if the handheld can't run PS5 games at 60 FPS, then it really wouldn't be worth launching. Because if they launched it and it was running games at 30 or running things in an inferior way, I think one of two things would happen here. It would become a technological bottleneck for all of the first-party games in the same way that the Series S has for the Xbox. I don't want PlayStation first-party studios having to deal with shrinking their games down or lowering scope or having to waste time getting things optimized to run on this handheld if it just isn't strong enough. And I just can't see a huge handheld breakthrough unless it came from PSSR. Another thing that would happen is maybe it'll just have its own games. And that's the last thing I would want studios that make games like God of War or Ghost of Tsushima. I don't want them doing handheld games. Like, I don't want them making that instead of making console games. In order for a handheld to be truly competitive in the market, it would need to be able to run third-party games and PlayStation games at decent enough visuals and hit 60 FPS, which leads to the final question, and this is the big one. Why are they trying to rival Nintendo? The biggest mistake you can make in business is to underestimate your opponent, and for a while now, PlayStation and Nintendo have coexisted almost parallel to each other in the market. PlayStation is attached to a tech company, so they naturally push the technology aspect of gaming with things like PSVR 2, the PS Portal, and the PS5 Pro, while Nintendo sees themselves as a toy company, and you'll commonly find these platforms not necessarily competing with each other, but largely coexisting in most homes. Nobody buys a PlayStation and says, well, now I don't need a Nintendo, and vice versa. Many gamers own both systems. But if we look at PlayStation's their first outing with a handheld and the total sales, I actually think this starts to make sense. You see, everybody remembers the PS Vita, which released in 2011, and it didn't do that well and they didn't sell that many. But what often goes forgotten is the PSP, which launched even earlier, roughly 20 years ago. And according to Statista.com, it sold over 80 million units. And when you look at the sales breakdown, it really starts to make sense why PlayStation may be gearing up to do another handheld almost 20 years later. With a very sort of even distribution amount with sales in Europe, America, and Japan, someone might have said, hey, listen, we did this 20 years ago. The market is now far more receptive to handheld gaming devices. Not to mention that roughly 1 in 4 people in Japan have a Nintendo Switch, and PlayStation has typically not had the greatest saturation in Japan. Currently, with roughly 61 million PS5s in circulation, estimates are that only 5 million of those have been sold in Japan. So if 20 years ago, PlayStation managed to sell 80 million handhelds and 1/4 of those were sold in Japan, they may see this as a great opportunity to grow in a market that they currently struggle in. But also, it could really help grow the consumer base. This has been a consistent narrative point that the consumer base of gamers and console gamers isn't really growing. It just sort of migrates and shifts around. So this could be another way that PlayStation sees a way to grow their base. So I think all of this leads to a very simple conclusion. I highly doubt that PlayStation has aspirations to actually beat Nintendo, but rivaling them and being in second place behind them wouldn't be that bad at all. Right now, when you go into the market for a console, PlayStation doesn't really have much competition anymore. Xbox is shifting its focus and making zero efforts to even compete with the PS5 Pro, and when you go to the market right now and look for a gaming handheld, PlayStation is currently only dipping their toe in the water with the PlayStation Portal. It would be a huge marketing advantage to have an alternative to the Nintendo Switch 2, especially given how the PSP sold 20 years ago. Gamers of today are far more receptive to gaming on the go, and playing second fiddle to Nintendo in the gaming handheld sales race is not a bad spot to be in at all. So while some view this as a mistake and something that they shouldn't do, it could end up being the exact opposite. But those are just my thoughts, and I'd love to hear yours. You can leave a comment below. You may get featured in the live stream that follows this. You can click the card right here, or there'll be a link in a pinned comment below. And as always, please hit like, share, and subscribe.